to reiterate a little bit about what we've been talking about. He's giving the speech or the lesson concerning the time from basically from Abraham up until this time, and they were in full agreement. The Sanhedrin or the council had gotten some individuals to make false accusations against Stephen. And, he has blasphemed. He's done this, he's done that, and false accusers. And we can see that Stephen is now giving his defense concerning these things. And thus far, even though all these things are coming about, he is still telling them the truth, and they are agreeing with that. There's nothing that he has told them that they do not agree with. And we can see there, beginning with actually about verse 30. Well, I guess you could talk about verse 39. But our descendants had been in this wilderness. Moses has gone up to the mountain to receive the laws, and all the things that are transpiring there. The mountain is quaking, and they see the clouds, and they hear the voice, but they do not understand the things that are being done. So they're in a loss because all this time being in bondage in the Egyptians, they were used to a God that they could literally feel or touch or use the five senses. And they had become accustomed to that, and maybe subconsciously. And then we can see Moses is tarrying on the mountain, receiving the laws, and God is talking to them concerning these things. And we can see that the first thing they're talking, says there in verse 40, Aaron, make us a statue, or make us a God that we could bow before, and that we could touch, and we could see, and we can understand these things. And we can see that he does just that. And basically, a little bit later on, we can see he said that they threw all this gold into it, and just kind of like puff, out came this golden calf. Of course, that's not in reality what takes place, because we can see that in this chapter here that Aaron made a golden calf from the different gold or the different articles that they had brought to him. Now, they could see this thing. They could see, they could understand that. In fact, they began to, actually, in one sense, they began to mock God, because they were having a feast to this golden calf. And they could see all the things that are transpiring there, the worship of this golden calf, and they're bowing before it. And it says that the people began to dance and enjoy all these things. And we can see what's taking place. They're now giving praise to this golden calf and saying this was the golden calf, or this was the thing, or this is the object, or this is the God that delivered us from Egypt. And we can see that is not the case, is it? Because all the plagues, all the things that God had taken care of, that crossed the Red Sea, all these things, they understood that. All right, now let's see what happens. And we can see there in verse 41, it was then that the people had something that they could tangibly look. And so God turned away from the people, did he not? What happened to it? What happened to it? What happened to the golden calf? Anybody remember? Okay. What did he do with it? Ground it up and made them drink in the water. So they no longer had a golden calf to bow. But notice something else, if you will. There in verse 42. So then God turned away from the people. God turned from, in other words, he turned a deaf ear to them, because they were no longer worshiping him. Because look at verse 42, verse 43. Said, and they carried them to the house, or they began to worship the gods of Moloch. Who was the gods of the Moloch, or Moloch? What nation?
Primarily the Ammonites.
Ammonites, that is correct.
But there were different forms of that same god.
That is correct.
Depending on which area you might be.
And we can see a little bit later on in verse 43, says they were worshiping what? The things of the heavens, the stars, the gods of the stars, and they were saying all these things were brought about because of the gods of the stars, the gods of Moloch, the gods of all these other things. And in reality, God was the one that did it not? And yet they're giving honor to somebody else. Now, notice in verse 45, our ancestors give this a special tent, which would have been the what? The tabernacle. So we can see that they built the tabernacle. God had it built. God told Moses how to build it and all the things it contains. Is that not true? Yes, that's true. Now let's notice something about this tabernacle. Where was it to be built? Where was it to be built as far as the congregation was concerned? Was it in the midst of the camp? Center of the camp. That is correct. So everybody had access to this. Who dedicated it? God did he not? All right. Two things we need to keep in mind. Whenever God was there, he was in what present, or he was, let's not put it that way. In what form could they see that God was in their presence? By day, it was by what? A cloud. By night, it was by fire. Okay. So they were led by the cloud and by fire. Turn with me, if you will, to the book of Numbers. And we want to deal with chapter 9 and verse 22. Notice something. They were continually in the presence of God. Notice verse 22. And what does it say? Far as being guided. Somebody read that for me. Chapter 9, verse 22.
Whether it were 2 days or a month or a year, that the cloud tarried on the tabernacle, remaining thereon, the children of Israel abode in their tents and journeyed not. But when it was taken up, they journeyed.
Okay, so God was the one that was telling them where to go and how to do it, is it not? You know, we think about, well, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, not necessarily wandered, did they? Because sometimes it was maybe a time period that they stayed in, maybe a fertile land where they could feed all the animals and fatten them up, or we might say expression. So God was the one that led them. When the cloud came from the tabernacle, they traveled. Now, not only that, turn this time with me, if you will, to the book of Exodus. And we want to deal with Exodus 40. Excuse me. Exodus 40, begin with verse 34. Well, excuse me. What did it say? God's presence was where? In the tabernacle? Okay. How long did they use the tabernacle? Okay. Remember our study in Judges? Or was the tabernacle placed after the wilderness wanderings in the Shiloh? Okay. That stayed there until what king? There's one king. If you remember, we can talk about it a little bit in 2 Samuel, the 6th chapter. David, okay. All righty. David has it brought to where? Jerusalem. 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 No, I don't know. All right. Now, David said he wanted to build a house for the Lord, did he not? All righty. Did he build a house for the Lord? No. Why did he not build one?
Because he was a war.
The blood was on his hands. That's correct.
He was a
Okay.
warrior, so he
Okay.
wasn't
All righty.
qualified.
Now you remember in chapter 7, 2 Samuel 6, the transport, we'll talk about it in just a second. Just,
The temple was constructed during Solomon's reign, but if you look at the narrative, David had tremendous amount of involvement.
Yeah.
That's
And
correct.
A lot of input.
But he was not given credit during his time as king.
That's correct. And again, whenever David had it brought from Shiloh, how was it to be transported? Remember?
Priests,
Back, all right, it was to be carried by the priest. How did David have it transported?
on a cart.
Basically on an ox cart. Remember the story about who was it that touched it? Uzzah. What happened to
He
him?
tried to keep it from falling, and no one was supposed to touch it, so he
Okay.
put his hand up there, he was killed.
Okay. So what I'm getting at is they were aware of all these things. Remember, this had taken place years before. They were aware of the history. They knew these things. So was Stephen telling them something that's false? No.
They agreed with him as long as he didn't start calling them names.
They know that.
They were still agreeing here. All these things that he's talking about. He said, that's right. You know, even though they had brought these false accusers in, they were not telling anything that was not true. So what's the problem? Thus far, there's not really been a problem, is it?
They were in agreement as long as he didn't call them names. Once he started talking mean to them, they
Mhm.
didn't like it. It was the truth.
Okay. And we can see there and basically in verse 40, about verse 46, as far as David was concerned, being king. And we can see that David, you're the God of all the earth. Now, David was known also as a man after what? God's own heart. He sought to please God, did he not? All the things necessary. Even though he made mistakes, he repented of these things. Is that not true?
Yeah, he admitted when he made a mistake.
He said that he was sorry for what he had done. And but we can see there in verse 47 that David didn't build the house or the place of God's dwelling, but Solomon did. We can see that in verse 47. Now, the question is, notice as far as a place for God to dwell. Now, when we think about that, the first thing we have in our minds is the temple. This is where God dwells. Can God dwell in a house like a temple? What do you say as far as the heavens is his?
He can have a presence there. He evidently evidence his presence there.
Okay.
Ever how that might have been. But his, as you speak of it, it's kind of comprehensive thought. And the fact that he is, his mind or his being can be everywhere. He's in all places when you think about that. But then yet his abode is in heaven. But yet he has evidenced himself where this would be his house. Is assigned to him. Must have been some sort of manifestation, probably of light or something of that nature that would have been above the Ark of the Covenant. So that's how
He
they're
was there in
thinking.
spirit. He wasn't not
Right.
physically was not there like we would be here.
Yeah.
He's here with us this morning, but you can't see him, touch him.
Okay.
They try to make the church building a holy place, like the temple was holy, and God's presence was in the tabernacle for sure, and in the temple. But he's everywhere now. He's not just, it says not in temples.
That's right. And these are the things, this is what I'm getting at. God can dwell in the heavens, but his presence, and like Tom said, are made known about us. We can't.
There's something to understand. The fact we brought up this discussion before, where Jesus made the reference to that, and when he was talking about the temple, at a point in time, as he is speaking about the temple, he speaks of it. And then, when it comes to that point, it's your house. It won't be his. Your house will be left unto you desolate.
Mhm.
Meaning that when that occurs, God's gone.
Okay.
His presence is not there anymore, signifying that it's not his house anymore. And that's the reason why the disciples had a hard time understanding what he was talking about in Matthew 24 about all that. But he made it very clear that would be something, and it was evidenced, in fact, by the splitting of the veil.
Okay.
When the veil split, should be everybody's indicator that was the fact that he had left the house.
Okay.
No longer his, and that's the reason why there wasn't going to be any problem where God was concerned in having Romans come in and level the place. It wasn't his house anymore.
Okay. And again, gets back to verse 49 as far as reference to what we're talking about here. The heavens cannot hold him. And he said, even the earth is his footstool. It cannot contain the presence of God. Now, I say the presence of God, God himself, because he cannot be contained in a building or in a small confined area that we could say that we could use the five senses again, because God is all knowing, all seeing, he's the creator. Therefore, he knows all things.
We're so curious about, we supposedly have found another planet in our solar system.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Pluto. There's supposed to be another planet they have found. And I can't remember if they've named it yet or not. I don't think they have. But anyway, we're curious about things of that nature. So we send out a lot of these satellites and things of this nature to travel through so we can find out more about these things. So we're kind of curious of what might be on, let's say, the other side of that planet. We can't see it right now, but if we'll send something out there, just kind of gives us a view of it. Even you go past that into the other solar systems that exist, God knows what's on the other side of every one of them.
That's right.
It's just, that's what's hard for us to comprehend. But even if you bring it back down, because some of us were talking the other day that some of the statements was made, and I can't remember what the context was. He knows every hair on us, and then we still look at that in a limited fashion. Okay, yeah, he knows how many hairs I've got on my head, but he knows how many hairs is on everybody's head at one time. He knows all of those things, and that's hard for us to comprehend.
Okay. All righty. Now, thus far, again, are they still in agreement with what Stephen is saying? Again, this is history. They knew the history. Now, notice in verse 51, actually,
That's where it all changes.
began to make a little bit of difference. Now, he kind of like the fellow said, he set them up for a fall. That's a good way of saying it. We can see that Stephen is being inspired by God. I think Stephen is being, God is guiding his lesson or speech before the council. Notice there in verse 51, what does it say? All right, you want to understand God? Basically, you people do not want to understand God. You don't want to hear what God has to say. You have turned a deaf ear to these things.
Your heart and your ears.
That's right. So here is the things now remember what we said. They were after the tangible things that they could literally touch, they could see, they could use the senses. That's what they wanted. But God is a spirit, and we've got to worship him and visualize by faith these things. We're in the presence of God, but as far as constantly in the presence of God, God's aware of all things. Said, and like I said there in verse 51, said, you do not understand about God. You're limited. Again, it gets back to the human aspect, is it not? we can't really comprehend God because we cannot visualize finality as far as all knowing. You know, there's people that have great knowledge, and I admire those. Great understanding, I admire those. Those who are great thinkers, I can understand that. But God is the creator of all these things.
Well, it's like what we was talking about earlier today. Jesus trying to make it clear about the evidences concerning himself. You know, the things that I presented everything I know to do to get you people to understand who I am and why you ought to believe. Well, it's the same way where these people were having the same problem. The Jews were having some of the same problem. And most of it comes by influence. They could not deny, they would have to have in memory what it was that God did while they were in Egypt, the plagues that were there, the opening of the Red Sea. You got all of these things that would have done this, that would have, as you see when they get on the other side of the Red Sea, now they're praising him and that sort of thing. But still, you've got the influencers always to try to detract. And so now when he mentions a stiff-necked, you know, you're obstinate. The idea behind that is like the old imagery when you have the ox trying to plow your line,
Mm-hmm.
and the ox either stops or he just goes off, and then you're having to follow them. What they would take a long rod, usually 8 to 10 feet long. They would have something on the end of it, and when that old ox would try to turn that way, they'd slap him upside the head. Mm-hmm. But you know, sometimes they get stiff and they don't want to do it. They rebel. And that obstinance is exactly what it is he's talking about here. Is they become hardened to the information, and as is pointed out by Isaiah, their hearts and ears they've just shut off. And it's the Spirit that's trying to get the message across to them. So it's not me, it's not the prophets that have tried to tell you this. You know, they're the messengers, but it was the Spirit that inspired them to say this. So the rejection is not against necessarily me or the other prophets, it's God.
Okay.
So you're resisting him.
Okay. And we can see again, what did he just get through telling them about those at Mount Sinai and all these things? They were in agreement there. That was fine and dandy. But then when he said, just as your fathers rejected, you are rejecting. And here's the idea again of the uncircumcised. In other words, there's the idea of going back. You're no more than the Gentiles that are profaning God's law, who disregard God's laws, who are saying they're not under the law of God. Then you know better than they are. And this is what I think we can see that he's kind of makes them riled up. Well, remember, we're of Abraham's seed. We're, like Tom said, we're in bondage to no man. Now call us just commoners, we might say, if that's a good way of saying it. Gentiles who have.
Basic idea behind that is you're unclean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they're in this idea here. It's a total rebellion against what God says, and you do always resist the laws of God. Now this was a slap in the face, was it not? You resist? No, we don't resist the laws of God. Yes, you are. You're not listening. What about remember earlier? What did he say that the prophets that are sent unto you? What did you do to them? You killed them. You know, people kind of like that today. If they don't want to hear something about something, what do? Destroy it, or a lot of times even preachers. My aunt was telling me the other day that their preacher, they didn't like him, so they decided to get another preacher. Well, the second preacher that they got is worse than the one that they had, but they can't get rid of it. So be careful sometimes. This is what these people are saying. Well, we don't want to hear the prophets. We don't want to hear this. We don't want to hear the word of God. We want to do it our way, as the expression is, and God is not having it. So God is giving them up as, quote, as a nation. He is no longer going to bless them like he had once before. Okay. And notice now, notice verse 52. Which of the prophets have you not, your fathers not persecuted in some way or other? And they've slain them. And notice also even the coming of Jesus, who they had seen in the prophets, who came just as the prophets foretold. And yet what happened? They rejected him as well. The one that came to save you. And what did you do to him? You betrayed him. And then murdered him. Just as you did the prophets. So this is beginning to get them kind of riled up. They're no longer saying, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Now, okay. Notice in verse 53, who have received the law by what? Disposition of angels, and have not kept it. You know it. You know, when we talk about the old law, the first thing that we have in mind is what? 10 Commandments. You know, we automatically, well, what was the old law? Well, we automatically get, oh, it's just those 10 Commandments. No, there was several hundred commands. Sir?
Over 600 of them.
Yeah, I think couldn't remember exactly how many it was, but there was a lot of laws. Read all those laws there in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And they had to keep these things. And he said, ye would not. Even though God said, I will bless you if you keep these laws. We don't want to do that. Sound familiar?
Well, it reminds me of, again, people that Joshua was dealing with before he died. We will serve God. No, he won't. Yes, we will. No, you're not. You're going to have to put away the gods that you're hiding and are keeping, and time that you're spending and following around these with some of these other peoples that we're supposed to be getting rid of. And no, but we will. Okay. And then you're witness to yourself. Okay, we'll be witness to ourselves. If that's what it is we're going to do, and then just a generation later, everything goes south on them, spiritually speaking.
Oh yes, and then what takes place? Verse 54. All right. They just became more and more angry, did they not? And they gnashed on. In other words, there's the idea of just contempt, I guess would be a good way of saying it. This anger was so great. They just almost tearing their teeth or grinding their teeth from anger.
They considered this as a very deep insult. To the point that the term cut about, I think it was the idea they're completely exasperated at this point. They have run out of patience and listening to him.
Okay. So they became, just like I said, more and more angry, and and because of becoming so angry, look at the next verse. What's taking place now? Stephen is doing what? He knew basically what was fixing to take place. Knew the results.
Knew what was coming.
And Stephen, even though he was facing death, knowing fully well that what was fixing to take place was going to be his death, because they had already brought these false accusers in, and now this anger was so great. And what does it say that Stephen looked up to heaven and saw what?
So Jesus,
On the right hand.
right hand of God.
Do you think this kind of infuriated him that much more?
It went from words to violence, physical violence.
Okay.
It's like mobs now, mob violence.
His direction in this was the Spirit evidently motivates him to look. This is part of that direction. Of course, he's speaking about inspiration anyway.
Right.
Inspiration tells him that this is what he sees at this particular point, and now he's explaining what he sees. They evidently don't, but it's what he sees. And
It infuriates him that much more.
yeah,
That's one of the things I was getting. Who saw it other than Stephen? I don't think any of the others did, because they had already closed their eyes and their hearts to the truth, did they not?
Yeah, they weren't listening to anything. They were blind.
well, it's interesting too, though, when he makes the statement, I see the Son of Man on the right hand side of God. Well, that could have been the perception. Could have been anybody.
Mm-hmm.
From that standpoint, if they're thinking that, all right, the one who is part of the Godhead would be there, you would not think anything about it. But the terminology that he uses is the same terminology that Jesus used regarding himself while he was here.
Mm-hmm.
When you take the Son of Man and you lift him up, you see that, hear that language so now when Stephen repeats that language, that's when they associate that one that he supposedly sees on the right hand side of God.
Okay.
That's where this, I guess, just drives him over the edge.
All righty. Now again, going along the same line, what in verse 57? Whenever he made this statement, I can see the Son of God or Jesus on the right hand of. What do they automatically do?
They cried out,
Close their ears. We don't want to hear that.
stopped up their ears.
Yeah, we don't want to hear anymore. This would be in their concept. This is blasphemy to them. So their anger, I don't want to even hear it. So this anger was just so great. I cannot begin to imagine what it would be like in something like this, other than in comparison to that of Jesus, as far as the knowing full well what's fixing to take place. Just as Jesus knew what was fixing to take place. But notice something.
You just kind of visualize the situation as this speech has been going through and what he's leading up to. Is all of this is bringing itself to Christ. So the message that they're hearing, it's simmering. Things are just kind of simmering, and then you get to this point where the heat finally just overcomes and the pot boils. And so now the lid comes off.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all of these who are hearing this. It's just like, because you notice in the statement in verse 57, with one accord.
Mm-hmm.
So every one of them, you can, when he's making this statement, it's real loud, and put their hands over the ears, and then that's when they rush him.
Okay.
And then do what they do.
All righty. So again, whenever he makes a statement, I saw the heavens open and see Jesus. And again, this was something they just couldn't stand. And just as a child, and like Tom said, just as a child might be told by his parents not to do something, and we don't want to hear it, so we close our ears and make all kinds of noise where we can't. Well, I didn't hear that. Well, they did hear it. They understood it, and they didn't want they didn't want to obey. Okay. Now, so they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears, and they ran upon him. Now notice verse 58, and cast him out of the city. Now, did they, as far as the Jews, have the right to kill Stephen. As far as the law was concerned, their law was yes, but as far as the Roman, who was the Roman law? Okay, Adi,
This would have been based on their concept of blasphemy.
that's
So
correct.
That's the reason why. But even still, they could not do this within the confines of the city walls. They would have to carry him outside.
That's the point I'm getting at. So they had to carry him. Even though they were in the city, now they are literally dragging. I almost visualize the idea here of dragging Stephen outside the city. Now, first off, dragging is what about this humiliation? In other words, he's dragging and they're screaming and hollering, he's blaspheming, he's this or he's that, whatever the case may be, whatever they may be saying. And the rough handling of Stephen and dragging outside the city. And those people that are seeing these things. Now remember, this is a great crowd of people that are around here. They have listened to this. He's in the midst of the council. There's all those spectators that are seeing all these things as well. So it's not something that is quietly taken care of. You thought about it? Okay. And they cast him out of the city and they stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their coats or their cloaks, whatever the case, at a young man's feet. And what was his name? Saul. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And notice, and they stoned Stephen, calling upon God and saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Now, there's a comparison. There's several who have compared this statement with that of Jesus. And we can see the similarities quite well, I say significant in it. What did Jesus cry whenever?
Well, he mentioned it is finished.
Yeah.
And one of the other statements that he also made, yeah, and he does that, but then forgive them for they know not what they do.
Okay. Jesus said, receive my spirit, did he not? Just as Stephen said here, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. He knew the results of what was fixing to take place. So he did not have any, we might say, anger against them, did he? What might we do in a situation like this? Something to think about. But here is the faith that is very, very prominent here, is it not? He knew what he was doing and he knew the results. He had already been given what? Sign. He had seen Jesus on the right hand of God. So he was aware of that. So all these things were taking place, okay? So he knelt down and cried with a loud voice, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge, just as Jesus had said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. I think this is a beautiful thought to me. After a hard day of work, I think I commented to Gwen after weed eating and mowing and trying to get all the yard done yesterday. Whenever I laid down last night, I was probably, by the time my eyes closed, I was asleep. And it's peace, quiet. There's the idea of the peace and quiet. You didn't have to worry about all the other things of the world. And so this tranquility there, he fell asleep. Some have used the word he died. Well, that's true. But I think it's more of a beautiful thought that just he fell asleep.
A lot of people we don't put into context about how this goes about either. This is a violent death. It's not something that he's not shot, he's not hung, or anything of this nature, which
Prolonging.
A bit more humane, I guess you might say. But they're not standing by throwing just a little bit of rocks and things with them. They normally there'd be rocks that they would hold with two hands. Come down.
Plunge at the bottom.
whole point was, usually in many occasions, I'm sure that a lot of times they would be probably dead after the first time, depending on where they got hit. But, that's a violent death.
A lot of times, didn't they put them down? It was like in a low area, most of the time, that's what it's depicted on. the
Okay.
And they could get their strength to pull it down.
Found it all.
All righty, let's begin, Lord willing, then if there's no questions, our next chapter. Thank you.